Welcome to the Progression Health Podcast. I'm here with Priyanka Naidu. Priyanka, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I have a background in psychology, mainly in research. I completed my PhD in 2021. I've also tutored and lectured at university in the past in various subjects, and I'm currently doing some research consulting. Primarily, my research projects have seemed to involve questions that use social psychology frameworks. And over the last year or so, I have seemed to shifted my interests and focus a little bit, or expanded my interest, and have been really drawn to understanding and applying psychology and research in psychology to support people's well-being and help people achieve their goals. So, when performance, for example, is impacted by stress, overwhelming emotions, low confidence. So I seem to sort of be heading in that well-being and performance space at the moment. Yeah.
Very good. Well-being and performance. Yeah. So would you say well-being and performance is your specialty, like what you specialize in right now? Because you do a lot.
I would say I'm shifting that way. So I had an opportunity at the beginning of last year, which was to lecture in sports psychology. And I remember when I got it, I was thinking, oh my goodness, what do I know about, sports? But really it falls under a broader branch of psychology, performance psychology. And if you think about it, we perform in a variety of different settings. So we can perform as an artist, as a musician, at work, at school, as an athlete, or we can think about social situations as being a performance. And so I found that the course was really applicable to a variety of settings, to, a whole host of, different kinds of people. And we were, I was teaching and learning along the way about, effective goal setting, confidence building, managing stress, which are all, important for pretty much everyone. So I think this opportunity to teach this course really sort of led me onto this journey to wanting to share what I was teaching with a more broader audience, because I think everyone can learn from this. And I run workshops periodically about stress management and behavior change as well. And I've got some journals as well, a sort of paper-based resource to support with that too.
Brilliant. So stress management, can you tell me a little bit about that? Is it important? And where could somebody start? If somebody's listening, they're like, I actually am very stressed or I'm burnt out. What would you recommend?
Yes. So there are many things that we can do with managing our stress. And I think with stress, we're always going to come up against stresses. So what we can do is, build ways to manage that better. So in my workshops, I usually begin by talking a little bit about why we experience stress in the first place, because I think that's quite helpful to understand, because we can sort of understand what we can do to alleviate stress and also why that works. So I guess first of all, a definition of stress, which is when we feel like we can't meet the demands of a situation. So those demands could be physical demands. Maybe we're putting too much stress on our body. It could be demands on time, on energy, or demands on our emotional capacity to deal with certain situations, because we don't have sort of this unlimited capacity to deal with, emotional things. So essentially, when we experience stress, it's when our body thinks that we're in some kind of danger, whether that's a real danger or not. And we have one response to danger. So, when our stress response is activated, it doesn't really differentiate between a real threat or a perceived one. And so we can react to, for example, an axe murderer in front of us, versus a conflict with our boss in the same way. And so because we have this one response to stress, it means that our stress response is going to be, more or less helpful in certain situations. But our stress response evolved to protect us from the kind of, physical threats that our ancestors would experience, fleeing a rival tribe, or fighting off, just being in dangerous situations, basically. So things like being ostracized, from a group isn't as dangerous now as it once was. But we still react to things like social exclusion, judgment, negative evaluations, as if it's a life or death situation. So by knowing that, we can then understand why sending ourselves signals of safety is really important. So, practicing strategies that relax the body and relax the mind. So self-talk, I find really helpful for me. And also, practicing those relaxation strategies. But I should say that sometimes, when we do want to quieten our mind, it's easier to sort of do that through our body, exercise and, meditation, things like that. So there are a number of strategies. So we can look at sort of the symptoms of stress, which is we've got the cognitive symptoms and the physiological. So we can target the thought component or the physical ones. So, for example, it could be, there's a whole heap of things we can do. Deep breathing. There's sort of a deep breathing exercise that you can do to quickly sort of activate that parasympathetic nervous system, which is the nervous system that's, helps us sort of calm down. And there's something called, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, progressive muscle relaxation. So it's when you sort of tense your muscles and you release. And that's something that, a lot of athletes do as well. So before game day, for example, if their body's really, really tense and they're feeling really nervous about the game, they can sort of, tense up their muscles, release it. And that really helps you kind of identify what it feels like to be relaxed. Because I think that can be important. We don't sometimes realize how tense we are. So lots of things that we can do to manage stress.
I feel as though a lot of those have elements of mindfulness, so obviously meditation, but then exercise, getting in tune with your body, the progressive muscle relaxation, getting aware of like the feeling of tensing up and then releasing, self-talk, that's mindfulness as well. Is that a common theme among all of these approaches, or am I overextending it?
No, definitely. Because if you think about it, a lot of the time, we might be ruminating about something that's happened in the past, or we might be anxious about something that's going to happen in the future. And so, anchoring yourself to the present moment, really being in the here and now can really help. And so there's one strategy that I love doing when I've got, racing thoughts. Everyone has their sort of uncontrollable, intrusive thoughts sometimes. And it's called a 5-step grounding technique. And it's when you use your 5 senses. So it can be, what are 5 things that you can see? What are 4 things that you can feel? So using that, if you're trying to get into, trying to sleep, maybe like thinking about the blanket, the warm blanket and all those sorts of things. 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So that's a really, great technique that I love using, that you can, use pretty much anywhere.
Wow. So how effective do you find that? I've heard of it before, and I sort of, to be honest, I personally wrote it off without even trying it. So do you find that effective for yourself and with clients? Do they find it works?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the time it's not just one strategy. I think it's practicing a whole host of different things as well. So it's just knowing that you have this toolkit, and you can access all of these different things. I think that can be really empowering, because when you're in those moments, that actually there are things that I can do. There are things that I know that will work for me. And so one thing that I find really helpful personally is journaling. So it's something that I think if you do consistently can really help, sort of putting all of those thoughts on paper. There's something about, I think, writing it rather than typing as well, that I find really just, really therapeutic. And it allows you to sort of create a bit of a distance between what you're experiencing, how you're feeling, and doing it over time. You can also see some patterns in behavior and start to question things and shift and change things as well. So I think, practicing a lot of things. I think really targeting the thought component and also the physical relaxation, I find the most benefit from.
Very good. Yeah. And you mentioned rumination. So like, I know when I get most stressed, it's because I'm ruminating on something, I'm not being mindful. So what is it about ruminating, getting lost in thought, that is that can be so stressful for some people? Do you know anything about that?
So the way that so self-talk, sometimes it can cause stress, and sometimes it can exacerbate stress. So I think with ruminating, like I said, journaling really effective. There is a technique that I like to use as well and that I talk about, which is thought reframing. And so, what you can do is think about sort of the unhelpful thoughts that you experience most of the time, or that sort of, pop up a lot of the time, write them down and think about a possible reframe for that. And so what you can do when it comes up again, you can think about a thought or an action that triggers you to stop that thought. So for example, if you've got a presentation or if you've got something that's really important and your thoughts are, I'm going to fail at this, I'm going to embarrass myself, all of those sorts of thoughts, have a trigger that stops you in its tracks. So it stops the thought in its tracks. So maybe, shaking your head, saying stop, whatever it is. So you stop the thought and then you replace it with a more helpful thought. And so that automatically shifts you in a different mindset from sort of avoiding threat to an opportunity mindset. And so that's something that requires sort of consistent practice for you to then make it more automatic, for you to then think in more helpful and balanced ways. So that's something that people can practice, and that's something that sports psychologists use as well with, players if they're experiencing unhelpful thoughts before game day, or, just before they need to take their shot, it's reframing that as well. And, changing, shifting perspective as well, thinking of things like like a learning opportunity, Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to come back to journaling, but for now, have you heard of a term called doom scrolling? It kind of reminds me of so obviously active versus passive scrolling is what I'm getting into on like social media. It kind of reminds me of ruminating, except in the virtual world, right? So ruminating is like, looking at a challenge and just thinking about it as opposed to taking action on it, right? So it's kind of like you're scrolling through the feed of whatever social media app you're using and not actually like, being present with your thoughts. Is scrolling on social media a form of rumination? Is that fair to say?
I don't know if it's a form of rumination. I think it depends how you're using social media as well. Like there's a meta or systematic review that I've posted before on my social media page, and it really like the relationship between social media and anxiety and depression, for example. It depends on a host of factors. So it depends, for example, what kind of cognitive style do you have? So are you more likely to be a ruminator? Are you more likely to brood? And therefore, social media might not be great, for your mental health. So there's a number of different factors, but I think potentially social media can make it more likely to have these negative thoughts or these unhelpful thoughts, because we all make social comparisons. We make comparisons between us and other people because it's a way for us to understand ourselves better. And we can make upward social comparisons where we're comparing ourselves to people that we perceive to be better off than us in some ways, or downward comparisons where we perceive, we think we're better than other people. But we're more likely to make upward social comparisons in, when we're on social media. And so that can impact mental health as well. So there are all these different factors. If you're having a lot of positive interactions on social media, and you're using it as a way to connect with your friends and things, it can actually have positive impacts on mental health. So it really depends how you're using it, how much you're using it, and things like that. Yeah.
So it's like important to be mindful in the real world, but also on social media as well, because if you're making certain comparisons, then that can obviously backfire.
Yes, definitely. I think we all have a tendency to make those social comparisons, and social media just makes it easier for us to do so.
So just going on comparisons, you hear some people say like, oh, I need to compare myself, or it's useful, for example, at work, they might say like, oh, I need to compare myself to this person so that like I have a job, because if I'm worse than that person, the kind of a certain person, then I might get fired, for example. So is comparison completely like a negative kind of way to look at things, or, is there a way to use it in a useful fashion?
Yeah, no, you make a really good point. Like when we make upward social comparisons, it's not always a negative thing. It can be to motivate ourselves We might be in a class where we want people to be better than ourselves because it's motivating and it's inspiring and it, makes us sort of, grow and learn more. It depends on how you use it for sure. Sometimes, if it's, if we're experiencing more anxiety, if we're making an upward comparison, maybe we want to make downward comparisons, So yeah, it really depends on how you're using it.
Yeah. And just something I've kind of spotted recently in my own use of social media, kind of just randomly came about, is I'll see some other athlete and I'm not sure how I came to this point, but it's like, instead of saying like, oh, wow, they're so much fitter than me or whatever, it's like they have started to inspire me. So it's like, I'll see somebody who's like a faster runner or who's like older and running. There's one guy who's like 50 and he's like done more marathons than me and he's faster than me. And I'm like, I want to be like that. Instead of saying like that kind of, I think I'm not sure what type of comparison it is, but it's not affecting me negatively. It's actually inspiring me. So is that like a form of reframing how we look at things? And how can I do more of that? Because I find it very like uplifting.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's a matter of sort of curating your newsfeed, Definitely I have, other academics or people that definitely I learn from and I'm inspired by the work that they create. And I think that's a great way of looking at it. I think I'm not sure actually in terms of how you, do that more. I think it's just identifying, when people, having more of those things where people are inspiring you, sort of having more of that content on your feed rather than, and just, noticing when you're not feeling great, when you're, scrolling through and maybe muting those kinds of posts or, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a little bit of mindfulness for sure, because like without being aware of how looking at certain people or certain posts affect me, I wouldn't know how to react to it. So I think kind of curating my feed a little bit has definitely helped. So just going back then to the journaling. So you have your own journal.
Yes.
But before we get to that, so what exactly is journaling? Because I remember growing up, it had like a stigma for me. It's like, it's only for girls. It's only, like, I don't know where this came from. I think maybe Anne Frank or something like that. But it's so silly because like, I think everybody should journal. It's very useful once you get into it and you get the habit formed. So is there like kind of a correct way to do it? Or is there a certain style of journaling that people find most effective in your experience?
Yeah. So for me, journaling is just pen and paper, honestly, just writing out what you're experiencing. A few years ago, I really experienced, I think, sort of the benefits of journaling. I was going through something at work and, it was a comment that someone had made that triggered me. We all experience that. And it was earlier in the week and then it was Saturday and I was thinking, this is still bugging me. How am I going to deal with this? And I just found that writing about what I was experiencing, the emotions attached to it, and really understanding the meaning that I had attached to what this person had said, because it probably wasn't, I was making it into this sort of big thing and really understanding more about myself. So I think it's just writing. It's writing about what you're experiencing, and over time you can see a pattern in that behavior. I find it really, really beneficial. And again, I think I've tried sort of typing and using a Word document as a journal, but I think writing really does something else. Like I think there's like a deeper level of processing or something happens when you're writing. But yeah, I would definitely encourage people just to try it.
Yeah, I would definitely say the pen and paper. I think it's more like ingrained in our like pathways to write with pen and paper than it is to type. And in a few years, I'm sure typing will become the new pen and paper, like once a couple of centuries have passed by. But for right now, until that time where typing kind of kicks in more, I think writing, it's like an extension of your mind, and you'd be surprised about what you'd write. The patterns, I haven't noticed that a lot. So can you talk a little bit about like how you notice patterns in your journaling and just, the benefits that people might see?
Yeah. So I think sometimes, so one thing that's coming up in my mind is, if you're in a relationship and, sometimes I think when you're in a situation, you can't see it objectively, and so writing about it over time, you can see, okay, this is how I'm dealing with this situation. This is how the other person's dealing with that situation. Okay, maybe we can make certain changes. What would that look like? And you can see things a little bit more, I think, objectively, because you've sort of created a distance between what you're experiencing and what you've written. And yeah, I find it to be really powerful.
That sounds interesting. So you're getting a lot of distance from a situation that could be kind of triggering, which it makes me think of a quote I got from a coach, and I always debated it in my head, because I think in gym culture, it's all about like just train more, keep training, the more intensity, the better. So, kind of along those lines, the quote was, feels ain't real. It's like how you feel isn't real. And I'm like, whoa, that is like very potentially toxic, right? Because like your feelings, if you're tired, you might need to take a break, right? So it's like, do you think there's any truth to that quote, or like would journaling be a time where you could flesh it out?
Yeah, feelings are, they go up and down. It's like motivation is a feeling, and that waxes and wanes, but there is a power in sort of identifying the emotions that you're experiencing and stating it. There's that quote, I don't know who it's by, but it's name it to tame it. Yeah. And just by saying, instead of saying, I am mad, I am noticing that I am feeling mad, that can help. It's called, I think, like emotion, granularity. No, I don't know. But it's identifying the emotions that you're experiencing. And often we're not just experiencing the one emotion, right? We're experiencing a whole host of other ones. So I try and identify, what are the top 3 emotions that I'm experiencing right now? And just by naming them out loud can create a distance between that, your emotion, what you're experiencing and the feeling.
Yeah, I've actually heard that before, specifically with depression, and people would say, I feel like there's an Irish artist, Brezzy, I think his name is, you mightn't have heard of him, but I think he named his depression like the Black Dog or something. And when he named it like that, he got distance from it. I would need to be like fact checked here, like this could be completely wrong, but I've heard of the whole idea of naming a feeling or something, because then it kind of takes the power away from it. It's not this vague, like insurmountable challenge in your head. It's actually, it kind of reduces it in size and you get a bit of distance from it. So
yeah, definitely.
With your journal specifically, what are like some of the features of it? What can people get out of it, and why did you put it together?
Yeah, so I wanted to create a resource where I'm sharing, information that can support people's well-being, and using evidence, based strategies, as well as things that have helped me personally. So I first created my well-being journal. It's not too content heavy. It's meant to be sort of like an exercise book. So I find that there's this, there's a real gap between knowledge and action, right? We know the things that we're meant to be doing, but we don't often apply it to our lives. And so what I wanted to do was sort of provide people these, for example, my wellbeing journal starts by talking about creating habits, and, values and goals, and creating habits that stick. And, there's prompts and exercises there for people to think about how they can actually apply that, straight away to their lives. So, for example, I talk about habit stacking. Have you heard of habit stacking before? Yeah. I absolutely.
BJ Fogg in his book, I've heard of that before. Yeah.
It's really great. And so instead of just going, this is what habit stacking is, which is, if you want to create a new habit, it's pairing a existing habit with a new one. And so those two habits together, sort of the initial habit cues, the new habit. And so writing about that, but then also asking the person, what habits do you want to create? How can you actually, put this together? And so, I wanted to find ways where people can really apply what they're learning into their real life. So my wellbeing journal talks about creating habits, like I've said, unhelpful self-talk. So there's some exercises there inspired by cognitive behavior therapy. And I talked about the sort of, reframing unhelpful thoughts and things like that. Sleep hygiene. Sleep is so important for physical health, for mental health, for everything. And also just some relaxation strategies as well. And then, ask people to think about their wellbeing goals for the day. And then I've got the goal setting and behavior change journal as well. And that talks about 20 evidence-based tips to improve goal setting and creating habits that stick to support long-term behavior change. Yeah.
Well, very good. So there's like a lot that people can work on with those journals. So could you give an example of habit stacking that like maybe you do or you've heard are effective for other people? Because I feel as though I haven't used it in a while, but I know it's very effective when I do use it.
Yes. So one thing I did recently was I want to stretch more in the mornings. I get a really just tense, my tense shoulders and back. So stretching in the mornings I find really, really helpful. And I would forget all the time. Like, it'd be midday in the afternoon and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot to stretch this morning. And so what I decided to do was stack that behavior into an existing habit. So in the morning, I'll always have a coffee or a tea or something. And so as soon as I make my tea, for example, I'll go to my mat and I will stretch. And so that's one way that I've sort of paired those two habits together. I also find that visual reminders work as well. So actually having my mat in my lounge room so that I see that as a visual reminder in the morning too. So both of those things together have been really, really helpful. But, if you want to start a journaling practice, let's say, if you have a morning coffee, maybe that's when you can journal. Yeah.
Yeah. And just, can you explain the kind of the visual cues as well? Because I find sometimes I'll try and leave out, again, when I'm being mindful, I'll leave out like a reminder for myself, like a sticky note of, remember to do this, or this is coming up, or you want to focus on that. So, why are visual cues important if they are at all?
Yeah. Honestly, I think, we're so busy that we often forget, the goals that we're working on, the habits that we want to create. So having a visual reminder is really important. So, just, having, your sneakers near your front door, if you want to go out for a run a bit more, if you want to eat more fruits and vegetables, having that at the front of the fridge, things like that can really help. And also making things easier for you to do as well. So the example of having the fruit, the front of the fridge, and then having things that you might want to avoid. Maybe you're snacking quite a lot, you want to cut down, and having that at the back of the fridge. Just making those slight adjustments can make really big changes to behavior.
Yeah, actually, I used to think that it was like some really clever hack to like leave my shoes out to run or my clothes out to work out. And I'm like, this is kind of nerdy or whatever. And then I'm just like, you just explained it there. And I'm like, no, it's literally easier. Like there's no complicated science behind it. It's like if my shoes are where I can see them, it's easier to run than if my shoes are in a cupboard and I can't see them. It's not, there's no rocket science to it. It's like very, very straightforward.
Yeah. Well, the thing is with our brains are pretty lazy. It opts for the easiest thing that's going to give us the highest reward. So I find that helpful to remember. So if you're trying to cut down on snacks, having it within arm's reach of the couch isn't going to be helpful because your brain goes, okay, I need a sugar hit. I want that. But if it's somewhere, downstairs in the pantry or whatever, and you've got a bowl of fruit right in front of you, you'll opt for the fruit. So, little adjustments like that can really help.
Yeah, that's so true. I think putting like the candy, the snacks that I have in the home, I put them out of sight and they're out of mind. And then I just typically don't snack as much. So going back to the stress, so you had a stress management workshop. So you really got into the kind of the weeds of stress management. What was discussed there? And what were the kind of the key kind of takeaways for people who participated?
Yeah. So I think, with stress, what I like to talk about sort of the fundamentals as well. First having the fundamentals there, making sure that we're eating well, we're moving. Exercise releases a whole heap of sort of feel good hormones and chemicals that can help us manage stress. And also quality connection, having good support around you, I think makes a world of difference. So if you have the fundamentals there, you're off to a good start. And also, building good routines and habits are important to manage stress. So building, routines and habits that incorporate all those things. You're eating well, you're sleeping well, you're practicing good sleep hygiene and things like that. But really, I'll talk about also the cognitive and the physiological sort of responses to stress. And we kind of go through different types of breathing techniques, for example. So we've probably talked about breathing techniques on this podcast before, but ensuring that your exhale is longer than your inhale sort of activates the vagus nerve, which is involved in calming down our nervous system. So our vagus nerve is the longest nerve in our body, and it connects our brain to our gut. And it's sort of in a two-way direction. And activating, that. A lot of things that we can do to calm down our nervous system works by activating our vagus nerve. So things like humming can actually, stimulate the vagus nerve, singing, gargling, so anything that's sort of using sort of vibrations in your vocal cords. But breathing is a very easy way, a really quick way. And then we talk about reframing unhelpful thoughts. So, some sort of journal prompts and things like that you can use to really sort of critically analyze sort of your thoughts. So, if you've got an unhelpful thought, thinking about what evidence do I have that that's true? What evidence do I have that that's not true? And some strategies, require a bit more time, but we talk about, strategies that can be done very quickly, or if you, have a bit more time. But also these things, I like to think about them as the skills that we can build. So just like, building a physical skill that takes time and repeated practice, right? So, if you want to gain muscle, if you want to gain endurance and strength, that you need to put in time to build those skills. So it's the same with mental skills. And I don't think we think about it in that way. If we want to build confidence, if we want to build mental resilience, if we want to manage stress better, we can do this with, time and practice. We can build these skills.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of how, if we're talking about a physical ability like strength, or let's just say muscle mass, we can see the change. But if we are getting more mindful, it's harder to measure. Is there any way somebody could measure, let's say they're journaling and they're trying to like improve a mental skill, cut down on, scrolling, or I'm not sure, whatever it is, is there any way they could track it to get objective feedback of this is improving or it's not?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think when it comes to meditation and all those things, that becomes a little bit easier. It becomes a little bit easier to not be so distracted. So you might sort of notice those shifts. But in terms of maybe, let's say building confidence as a skill, you can see that happen, I think, quite quickly if you're exposing yourself to situations that you find quite, that make you feel anxious or fearful. That can happen quite quickly. And so, that's really interesting. I've never thought about those sort of really more objective measures in the here and now. So I think over time you can sort of track that with your mood and things like that. But I think that's one of the things why, it's hard sometimes to feel motivated when you're doing, when you're, even going to the gym, it's not like, you come away with a set of abs, if you hadn't had any before. So one of the things you can do is trying to make the activity more enjoyable, more rewarding while you're actually doing it. So, one of the reasons why we make goals is because we want to receive some sort of long-term benefit, right? We want to be healthier, we want to be more fit, whatever it is, but we don't gain those immediate rewards at the time. So making it more enjoyable. So things like exercise, for me, I don't like exercising, I'll be honest. It's very hard for me to get to the gym by myself. So I have an accountability buddy. I have a friend that makes it much more enjoyable for me to do, and things like that. Yeah.
That's actually Well, you had me thinking along the lines of, so you mentioned meditation, and I used to meditate with guided, tracks. And I was like, I'm not noticing any benefit. This is like, not great. And then a friend recommended silent meditation. And they're like, I swear by it, just try that. And then I was able to check in with this friend, and basically I was able to like note the benefits I was seeing. And even, for example, just doing something slightly more challenging, I was like, I'm actually doing this habit now. So I wasn't noticing any benefits, but the fact that I was making it a habit was kind of uplifting. And then to have that kind of buddy, like you mentioned, it just made it easier. So it's like, that's a good hack. If you're finding it difficult to form a habit, is to like get someone else to like do it with you. Do you ever find that like is an effective way to form a new habit?
Definitely, because I think there's two elements to it. It's more enjoyable if you're doing it with someone else. And also it's that social pressure. You don't want to let them down, So I've actually started meditating with a friend. So we go to these meditation classes. And honestly, I don't know if I would go to these classes by myself, but it's more enjoyable to do it with her. And there is that social pressure of I can't not show up, I'm going to let my friend down. And also, you get support and encouragement along the way. And that's an evidence-based strategy as well to help you reach your goals. People who do have accountability buddies are more likely to achieve their goals and to stick with the habits that they're trying to create for longer. So, definitely a bit of a hack there.
Good, yeah. And it's good to know science is on our side. It always helps.
Yeah.
Just in terms of doing a group meditation, how does that compare, just out of curiosity, to doing it on your own? Do you find any difference there? Because I know in my experience, I actually really enjoy doing a group meditation. It just feels very normal. Whereas when I'm doing it on my own, I'm like, I'm going to finish early, or I'm not going to do it, or I feel it can kind of feel weird because there's obviously no one else around you, where there's no social proof to be like, yeah, this is just what we're doing right now, So do you ever find it's easier in a group?
For me, yes, I get I'm very easily distracted. And so if I do meditate by myself, it will need to be like a guided meditation. And I like visual imagery. So you can find some really great ones where, they're telling you what to think about and what to imagine. And that I find quite helpful. But I'm just not as likely to do it on my own. If I say to myself, oh, I'm going to meditate, I think about, I'd much rather do all of these different things. So I've just started. So I think when I really, see those benefits we were talking about, I think I'll, more likely to incorporate that. But yeah, I think it feels nice to do it as a bit of a community as well. So the place that I go, they're very social after as well. They've got tea and things like that. And it's really nice. I think if you join a community where the behavior that, or the habit that you're trying to create is the norm, that can also help you as well. So, if you're wanting to run, joining a running club, those sorts of things. If you want to read more, joining a reading club, that can really help.
If you want to lower your stress, join a workshop.
Yeah, exactly.
So just going back to the workshop, so like is stress like really common right now? Like is burnout common? Like because sometimes like say I would personally feel stressed, but I'm like maybe it's not the norm. Or is there any kind of like general statistics on stress, like as a in I guess you're in the East, but in the West, like, or in the world, what are the levels of stress like right now? Do you know any idea?
Gosh, I don't actually know the statistics, but I think, stress is unavoidable. I think we're all juggling a lot of things. There are so many things that cause stress, school, health, finances, all of the above, cultural and societal expectations, even change can cause stress. So, things that we can't predict, things that we don't have control over can elicit a lot of stress and anxiety in us. I think that stress management for everyone, we can build skills, we can strengthen this, we can be better at managing stress because it is unavoidable and, it's just a fact of life, really.
And just in terms of like the different types of stress, is all stress bad? Or is it like, I've heard of like eustress and stuff like that. So like, is stress just necessary for like growth or sort of like skill acquisition? Is that like a fact of change?
Yeah, so no. So stress is not all bad for you. So in fact, there is a inverted U relationship between stress and performance. So up to moderate levels of stress, it actually aids performance. It helps you feel more alert, focused, vigilant. Your muscles are more prepared, activated, up to a certain point. And then with high levels of stress, you can see sort of detriments to performance. But there is actually an interesting study that looks at how bad stress is for you. So it found that whether you perceive stress as affecting your health matters. And this comes from a study conducted in, what was it? I think between 98 and 2006. It was published in 2011, and they looked at, I think it was like 29,000 participants, US participants, and they found that people who stated that they experienced high levels of stress and perceived it to be impacting their health in a negative way actually showed a 43% increase in premature death. So that's a huge number. And so people who reported high levels of stress but didn't believe that their stress was harmful were not as likely to see those negative impacts. So it seems like it's not stress that's bad for you, but the perception of it is. The perception of stress being bad for you is bad. And I think it comes down to what's called locus of control, which is whether we believe that we have control over something, in this case, health. So feelings of autonomy and believing that we have control over something or control over our own life seems to be really important to us, believing that our health is in our control. And it's not only linked with better health outcomes, but also mental health outcomes. We see lower levels of stress and anxiety. And actually, it sort of reminds me that one of the topics that I discuss in my workshop is called stress reappraisal, which is reframing our feelings of stress and anxiety. So when we feel stress, we often tell ourselves, just relax, just calm down. But it doesn't work because being relaxed and feeling anxious are two very different emotional states. And so our brain and body just doesn't buy it. So if you think of, symptoms of stress, right? You've got high cortisol, your heart rate's elevated. And that's also present when we feel excitement. And so it's much easier to trick your brain into believing that you're actually excited than it is to trick your brain into thinking that you're calm when you're, really quite stressed. So, next time you're feeling nervous, you can try saying that. I do that a lot, actually. So when people go, how are you feeling? I'm really excited. And I think one of the reasons it helps is because we tend to link stress to having negative impacts on performance and health, but we don't do the same with excitement. So excitement can put us in more of a opportunity mindset, meaning that we're sort of looking at or focusing on the good things that can happen rather than a threat mindset, which is when we tend to focus, on the negative consequences of stress in terms of it impacting our health or performance. And I think a lot of us can be, in that sort of threat mindset, and it's really robbing us of the pleasure of looking at ways that we can enjoy the situation or improve our skills. So yeah, that's one technique that I benefit from.
That's very interesting. Yeah. So it reminds me of the quote, it's like perception is reality. So it's like there's a bit of truth to that, where from what you said, where how we see things actually is our reality, but we can kind of, if we're more mindful, do you think we could just choose to see things in a way that serve us as opposed to that hinder us?
We can, but I think, again, that takes practice and takes time, to make that way of thinking more automatic. But in terms of perception, the scenario that I always like to talk about is, when there's, imagine two people on a plane. One person's really relaxed. They're looking out the window. They've got their headphones in. They're playing their favorite music, and they're just enjoying their time. And then you've got another individual, let's say, sitting right next to them. They're gripping their seat. They're terrified. They're having all these thoughts, like doom and gloom thoughts. And so they're experiencing the exact same situation, but having entirely different perceptions of threat. And so it's often not the situation that's eliciting stress and anxiety, but it's our perception of it that, we're in danger or we're not, that can be unhelpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking of recently I noticed I was like tensing up in my body. And thanks to the kind of quiet meditation I've been doing recently, I was able to like recognize that. And instead of being like, I'm tense, so therefore I'm stressed, I was able to like stop myself and be like there's no actual threat here, like relax. And then it was able to like dissipate a little bit. But I think, even thinking of a workout, for example, it's like I'll put on more intense music in a workout to sort of get my heart rate up and get more like psyched up for the workout. So it's like I'm thinking of the progressive muscle relaxation. Like, have you a lot of experience with that? Because as I said already, I tried it, didn't find it that effective, but do you think it works well for most people?
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of sports psychologists and coaches use with athletes. I do use it. I hold a lot of tension sort of in certain areas, like my hands. I kind of tense my hands up and sort of my neck and my jaw. And I don't realize that I'm tensing until I'll do something like progressive muscle relaxation, where you're tensing and you're releasing, and that release, you realize, okay, this is what relaxation feels like, right? And, sometimes you don't have to do, progressive muscle relaxation. You can just say to yourself throughout the day, stop tensing or relax, or just rolling your shoulders back and things like that. And having those little, I guess, statements throughout the day or mantras or whatever it is, to help you.
Yeah, just kind of tuning into your body, I think, is a very useful thing to do to appraise things more effectively. So another post I saw on your social media was decision fatigue, demonstrating research studies that show that the impacts of ego depletion. So decision fatigue, I've heard of that before, and then I've heard of things like our ego and stuff like that. And so like, what is decision fatigue and ego depletion, and how do they like tie into stress, if at all?
Yeah. So decision fatigue, it's when the quality of your decisions deteriorate with repeated decision making. So we don't have this unlimited supply of sort of mental energy for things like making decisions, practicing self-control, and regulating our emotions. So those three seem to be quite linked. So making decisions, practicing self-control, and regulating our emotions. So, if we've spend a whole day making really important decisions, that will impact our self-control and our abilities in regulating our emotions, essentially. So it comes from that same pool of resources. So, for example, this might mean that, it's best to make really important decisions at the beginning of the day. So there are some ways that, we can reduce decision fatigue, and that's by making routines, by creating habits. So habits are, the non-conscious or the unconscious sort of things that we do during the day. So, we don't really think about when we're putting our seatbelt on, when we're brushing our teeth, for example. That's a habit that we do. We don't decide whether we're going to brush our teeth in the morning, or I hope not. We don't decide whether we're going to put our seatbelt on. So creating routines where we're minimizing decision making. And that means you free up, brain space for important decisions during the day. That's why you hear, Steve Jobs, and I think it was Obama, they wear the exact same outfit, same clothes to work every day. And that's because, that's one way you can reduce the impacts of decision fatigue, by not having to make that decision. And also things like, making sure that you're having breaks during the day, sleeping well. Sleep's really important. And trying to just, automate some of your daily tasks by creating a routine can help as well. So, not deciding, oh, should I go to the gym or not? Just sort of having that as part of your routine, on a Wednesday, on whatever it is.
So you mentioned values earlier, and if we're forming like a routine or a schedule for the week or like for months, is it almost like it sounds like it would be anyway, that we'd need to know what we value in order to make a routine? I don't think is it possible to have a routine without knowing your values, do you think? Or do they kind of go together?
Yeah, I guess they do go together, right? So, if you're valuing your health, if you're valuing, learning, all of those things are going to tie into the habits that you want to create. So I guess values are like, they say like a compass that sort of guides, you on your path. And when you sort of steer too far away from it, you can kind of, I think you feel it, right? So definitely, I think, knowing your values is really important. And that's an exercise that I've got in my journal, actually. It's sort of identifying, what things that you value and tying your goals to those values. And then, creating habits as well to help you reach those goals.
So in terms of like figuring out our values, it kind of sounds straightforward. It's like, what's important to me, but I've done it before. I think it's a little bit more challenging than I first expected. So, what is the kind of the work that you have in the journal for people doing that? And like, how could somebody who, isn't clear on their values, how could they begin to become clear on them and start to live by them?
Yeah. So I think, it's identifying what's really important to you. When I was trying to narrow down my top 3 values, I did the opposite of that. And I was thinking, what are the things that really, really aggravate me? What are some of the situations that I feel really, that sort of light me up and I want to talk about. And that was another way that I found, for example, respect. Respect is for me a very important value. So if I see disrespect, if someone disrespects me, that's something that, really makes my blood boil. But, that's one strategy. So I think really sort of reflecting and thinking about what's important to you. Lifelong learning is also something that I think is really, really important to me. And that's by looking at sort of my what I've been doing. I've done a lot of study, undergrad uni honors, postgraduate. I've just started lifestyle medicine. Like I'm just always studying. And that's definitely one of my values. So I think, it's a combination of things. It's looking at your past behavior. It's looking at things that are important to you and narrowing it down then. Yeah.
Narrowing it down. Yeah. So, and then once you narrow it down, does it make things like decision fatigue and ego depletion like less of a factor? Like, does it make making a schedule or a routine like more straightforward?
Yeah, I think so. I think keeping in mind what your values are and creating goals from that can help. And then, so I like to sort of think about my values and then go from there, then goals, then you've got creating your habits, and then trying to, build these routines. I do want to say as well, though, with creating habits and building routines, because I know that, it's the end of 2022 and it's, the beginning of the new year. It's when we like to create all these big goals for ourselves, but work on creating 1 or 2 habits at a time. I think sometimes we go, okay, new year, we want to change everything. We want to change how we're eating, like all of these different lifestyle factors, but really focusing on one thing at a time is important and thinking about what sort of your keystone habits are. So, your keystone habit, what is that one habit that has all of these positive impacts on other behaviors in your day? So, for me, it's sleeping well. If I'm sleeping well, then I'm much more productive. I'm not going to be easily distracted and, scrolling on my phone for ages. I'm more likely to eat better. I'm more likely to exercise, all of those things. So actually focusing on my sleep as number one is really helpful for me. So thinking about, what's the one habit or the 1 or 2 habits that you can really focus on at the beginning of the year, and then you can, create habits. When that becomes a habit, you can sort of stack more onto it.
Yeah, absolutely. A keystone habit is so important. I find, like for me, it's exercise, and once that's like taken care of in a day, it's not like I have a great day, but it's like almost I never have a bad day if I get like some form of exercise in. So yeah, it can really you can almost stack habits then really. You could, you get the keystone habit in place and then you have it stacked then.
Exactly. Yeah.
So just another post you had was on immediate rewards or delayed rewards. So which predict, long-term goals. So like kind of like talking about habits again. Like are immediate rewards just a terrible way to go about like forming long-term habits, or do we need like a mix of both, or how do we go about forming habits and goals?
Yeah, no, immediate rewards are actually really important. So I was mentioning before, when we set goals, we're often thinking about these long-term delayed rewards that we're going to receive. But actually the research suggests that we tend to stick to goals when we enjoy the pursuit of them. So when it's immediately rewarding. So, the way that we can use that sort of research is by making it more enjoyable. So, if you want to eat healthier, how can you make eating healthier more enjoyable? Maybe your favorite smoothie in the morning and you're adding more vegetables to it, or your favorite pasta sauce and you're adding more vegetables to it, or whatever it is. If you're, exercising, I do it with a friend. That's making, for me, it's those immediate rewards. I'm enjoying my time with my friend. Trying to create immediate rewards, because motivation waxes and wanes, and we can't always rely on our motivation to keep us going. Even though we really want to improve our health, we also need those immediate rewards whilst we're pursuing that goal.
Very good. Yeah. What kind of immediate rewards would you recommend for let's just say someone, that I work with, they're commonly trying to change their nutrition. And I'm not sure why, but it's coming to mind as candy as an immediate reward, maybe because it's kind of that's typically a snack or something. But obviously, if you're trying to improve your health and your nutrition, I don't think candy is going to help. So let's just use the example of nutrition. Someone's trying to improve their nutrition. What kind of starting point in terms of immediate rewards would they be able to maybe track or focus on to achieve a longer term goal?
Yeah, so I think about what they can replace the candy with. Can they replace it with a healthier alternative? Their favorite fruit, for example, something that they'll still enjoy eating. It might not be as good as candy, but, it's still a replacement. So I personally find that for me, stopping behavior, I find that quite hard, saying I can't have this, that to be quite difficult. So I like replacing it with something else. Finding different ways that you can make that enjoyable. Think about, what their favorite things are to eat, and just either replacing it or adding something to it, adding, lentils or vegetables or, fruits and things like that to the meal, and go from there.
Got it. Yeah. So it's almost like reframing it, but reframing a habit or something, or reworking the habit that you have in place. So just the final topic I want to touch on is social media use. It's something that's talked about a lot. A lot of people spend time on social media. So is social media use linked to mental health problems like anxiety and depression? And what does, the science say about using social media?
Yeah. So I sort of touched on this study a little bit before, but it was there's a systematic review that was done. So essentially they looked at a number of studies. So they found that there were studies that found that there was a link between social media and lower levels of depression, anxiety, and some studies that found a higher level, and then some studies that didn't find any sort of relationship. So they looked at, okay, what's actually going on here? And often, there isn't a clear-cut relationship between all these variables. There are a number of moderating factors. So factors that make it more or less likely that something will occur or will lead to depression or anxiety. And so it really matters, there's individual characteristics that matter. So the cognitive style of the person, so I mentioned before, whether they are more likely to ruminate, whether they're, experiencing mainly, positive interactions or negative interactions, those sorts of things. So I really think it depends on the person, as well as how they're using it. And but there's not a sort of clear-cut line, because I think, especially with the pandemic, social media was great for so many people because they were able to connect to loved ones and family. And I find it a really great way, personally to keep in touch with my, high school friends that have traveled around the world, things like that. But when you can sort of identify that it's impacting your mental health, then I would say, try and restrict social media time, maybe, curating that feed and things like that. But it doesn't necessarily lead to greater levels of anxiety and depression.
Good. That's good to know. So I've heard of things like dopamine fasting, like these kind of extreme trends, or I've seen, even, for example, how I saw your page was through social media. So I know like there's different approaches to social media. You can get benefits, but there's drawbacks. What is your like sort of, let's say, your like opinion on social media, kind of almost like research aside, like on the whole? So do you think social media, like for people's mental health, is it like a negative for the most part, or is it kind of gray, or is it like, you know, mainly positive?
See, I think I'm more inclined to say it's probably not great for us, but I personally, you know, like I like using social media again to connect with people. And I find that I learn a lot from social media as well. You know, there's some really great, you know, content creators in there. There's some great educators on there. But yeah, so I think it is something that I think we're all addicted to. And I think we need to use it more mindfully. I think, we need breaks during the day, and we often reach for our phone when we need a break, when really, we should go for a little walk, or we should, do something else. And I find that there are some periods where, time where I wake up, I'm on my phone during the day, at night, and I have to leave my phone in a different room. I have to make it more difficult for myself to get on my phone. So I think there's, positives and negatives. I think it just, it depends on how you use it. But I'm not sure. I just think about the younger generation and, and bullying and all of those things and those comparisons that we make. And because we see the best of people's lives, and we're comparing that to how we're feeling right now, which might not be, the best. So it can be quite damaging. I think that we need to find ways where we're just not on it as much. We're experiencing the real world. We're experiencing life more instead of, we need to find different ways, I think, to relax as well. I don't know. It's a tough one.
Yeah, it really is, because there's a lot of benefits and there's a lot of drawbacks. I heard a great quote. It was like, sometimes, especially on, you can do this at any time, but especially with social media, we compare our insights or our internal world to someone's external world, which is, of course, like, that's a terrible way to compare, because you have no idea what's going on in someone else's world. But Priyanka, this has been great. Thanks very much for your time. Is there anything you want to tell people about, plug, or wrap up with any final message before we finish up?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you today, Ross. If you want to find me, I have a social media page called Interested in Research. So it's an Instagram research account. And I've also got a website, interestedinresearch.com. There's my workshops there and resources and things like that. And you can contact me through the website. So thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, you're welcome. And your page is great. I found a lot of use from it, and especially posts on the stress management workshop. So keep up the good work, and maybe we'll have you on again.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Bye.